Hey everyone, tonight we're not in some cozy library or tucked away under a blanket with a mug of cocoa. Tonight we're stepping outside into a place so cold that your eyelashes freeze together if you blink too slowly. A place where the sun forgets to rise for months at a time. You're in the polar night, and if you didn't know what you were doing, you probably wouldn't survive until breakfast. The cold doesn't just nip at your skin. It crushes through your bones, and it doesn't care how many layers you bought at REI. Imagine standing in darkness that never ends. The horizon smudged into the sky like black ink poured on glass, and you hear the ice groan beneath you, as if the earth itself resents your footsteps. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And let me know where you're watching from and what time it is, because while your room might be warm and safe, here in the world of Inuit hunters, the clock means nothing. Only survival does. Now, turn down the lights, turn on the fan too, some soothing music, and let's get going tonight. You shuffle forward, breath frosting in the air, and already your ears sting like they've been pinched by invisible fingers. Every exhale curls into the night and drifts away like smoke from a fire that never was. The trick isn't to fight the cold, but to make it work for you. At least that's what generations of Inuit hunters knew. And as your boots crunch through snow that's older than your grandparents, you can't help but think about the first human who dared to follow an animal out onto this frozen sea and not turn back. It sounds impossible, right? But then again, so does waiting at a seal's breathing hole for hours in the dark just to catch dinner. There's a rhythm to this place, and if you don't find it, the Arctic will break you. Think about it. This is a land where snow itself is both enemy and ally, where your house might collapse if you carve the walls wrong, and where your lamp fuel is the fat of the creature you just prayed over. Historians still debate whether the very first igloo builders were copying the domes of drifted snow by accident or by genius. But what's certain is that once someone realized frozen crystals could trap warmth, humanity officially cheated death. For the first time in the Arctic. It's funny in a way your phone dies in the cold after 10 minutes, but a carved block of snow keeps a family alive for weeks. And yes, you're wondering, doesn't it melt? Sure, sometimes, especially if you snore too loud. But that's the kind of problem you'd be glad to have compared to frostbite. You remember that time you complained about your heater being 2 degrees too low? Yeah, well, these people were burning seal oil in stone lamps just to keep their noses from freezing off. If you could plop an ancient Inuit hunter into your living room right now, they'd probably laugh at the electric fireplace and ask where the real fuel is. You press on, and the horizon doesn't change, it's just darkness. Sometimes the moon peeks out like a broken lantern. Sometimes the aurora slices across the sky in ribbons of green and purple, as if the night is trying to show off. But mostly, it's just you, your breath, and the crunch of snow. That's when the fear sets in, not the jump scare kind of fear, but the slow creeping realization that you can't tell east from west anymore, and your own footprints vanish behind you with every gust of wind. Hunters knew this trick too. Snowdrifts shape themselves in the direction of the wind, like frozen compasses, if only you have the patience to read them. Picture it now. You stop, kneel down, run a mitten over the edge of a drift. It curves, like a wave, silent, pointing you back toward camp. If you didn't know that, you'd be a headline. YouTuber lost in polar night after stepping out for content. Joke's on you, because they didn't have headlines here. They just had stories, warnings whispered from one generation to the next. Don't whistle at the aurora. Don't disrespect the animal spirits. Don't ever think you're tougher than the night. And that's exactly where you find yourself caught. Between the sharp teeth of survival and the soft glow of knowledge that humans have carried across centuries. The cold tries to tell you it's stronger. The dark tries to swallow you whole. But step by step, breath by breath, you're walking into a world where forgetting one small trick might be the last mistake you ever make. You crouch now, mittened, hands digging into the snow as though it were clay, carving blocks out of frozen white that at first seem brittle, but reveal themselves to be strong, almost like glass that somehow breathes. Snow as shelter, who would think of it? The stuff you brush off your car becomes the very wall that stands between you and frostbite. And the trick lies not in piling it randomly, but in shaping it like a spiral, block upon block, each one tilted just enough to lean inward until you close the dome. You're inside now, the light dim, everything hushed, as though the whole world took a deep breath and decided to leave you alone for the night. Historians still debate whether the first igloos were accidental experiments by desperate hunters, or the result of centuries of observing how foxes burrow into drifts. But either way, the outcome is genius. A home carved for what tries to kill you. Your body heat, joined with a small lamp, warms the air just enough so that the inner walls soften slightly and refreeze into a thin shell of ice, sealing cracks and making the dome stronger. You pull the hood tighter around your face, and suddenly you understand why clothing here isn't just fashion, but life or death. Because the wrong choice means frost nibbling through your bones before you even finish a breath. Imagine slipping into garments made from caribou hide, stitched with sinew, layered in ways that look simple, but work like an equation solved centuries before science could explain it. The hair of caribou is hollow, trapping air like 1,000 tiny thermoses. And when stitched fur to fur, hide to hide, the body becomes its own furnace. Historians still debate whether Inuit women perfected the layering system on their own, or whether it was borrowed from older Siberian traditions. But either way, the odd detail is that some parkas were sewn inside out, and then reversed again mid-season. A kind of early reversible jacket that would make modern designers jealous. Picture yourself standing in the darkness, pulling on boots so thick with fur you can't feel the ground, mittens dangling like furry paddles, and a hood rimmed with wolf hair that pushes the wind away from your face like an invisible shield. This isn't Fashion Week, but let's be honest, if it were, these hunters would win by sheer practicality. And here's the funny thing. Explorers in the 19th century who scoffed at such clothing often froze in their military wool coats, while the people they laughed at walked past them warm and comfortable. It's the ultimate "who's laughing now" moment in history. You think back to your own winter jacket, the one you complained about being bulky when you had to squeeze onto a crowded bus. Now imagine trading that for a parka so effective that your own sweat might become the only problem, because too much heat inside can freeze solid once you stop moving. That's the Arctic's cruel joke. Even staying warm has rules. There's a story from Greenland of a hunter who ignored advice and wore European-style trousers instead of caribou leggings. He ended up with frostbitten knees so severe he couldn't bend them again. The tale was retold for generations, not as tragedy, but as a reminder that survival is a dress code you don't get to break. As you picture yourself bundled in fur, you notice how every seam is stitched carefully. No drafts allowed, every fold designed with an almost mathematical precision, and it's hard not to admire the quiet genius behind it. Oddly enough, some parkas were decorated with patterns that weren't just pretty, they acted as social signals, broadcasting family ties or hunting skill. Almost like wearable ID cards in a world where introductions could freeze on your lips. And don't forget the boots. Sealskin soles waterproofed with oil, caribou uppers for insulation, layers tied together so you could swap them when one pair froze stiff. You remember how you once grumbled about wet socks on a rainy day. But here, one mistake with footwear could mean losing your toes by morning. Yet despite the stakes, there's humor here. 2 stories of hunters joking about whose boots squeaked loudest on fresh snow, laughter puffing out in clouds while they trudged across ice older than memory. Imagine that in a world where death lurked outside every flap of your parka, they still found time to tease each other about squeaky shoes. And as you stand in that imagined cold, wrapped in layers of fur that transform you into a moving fortress of warmth, you realize that clothing here isn't just armor against the elements. It's an inheritance, 1,000 years of trial and error sewn into every stitch. You tug the hood lower, breath muffled by fur, and the night feels just a little less hungry. Still, you can't escape the thought. What if you had stepped out here in your modern jeans and sneakers? The Arctic wouldn't even bother to laugh. It would simply take you, quick and silent, while a hunter in caribou waits patiently. Warm and alive, you sit now inside that glowing dome of snow, lamp flickering, shadows rippling along the walls. And you notice you're not alone. In the Arctic, survival was never a solo act. Warmth wasn't just about fur and fire. It was about bodies gathered close, voices weaving stories that stitched people tighter than any seamstress could. Picture families huddled together, shoulder against shoulder, sharing breath in the dark. So that heat pooled like water, each person a brick in a wall against the cold. Odd detail. Archaeologists studying soot patterns inside ancient igloos found signs that more than one lamp often burned together, suggesting neighbors joined forces. On the worst nights, choosing community over solitude. Historians still debate whether the singing and drumming described by early missionaries were sacred rituals or simply ways to pass the endless hours. But either way, the result was the same. A warm pocket of humanity in a sea of freezing emptiness. Imagine listening to the low thrum of a drum echoing against curved walls. The sound is steady as a heartbeat, while voices rise in song, laughter cutting through the dark like sparks. And here's the joke you thought group projects in school were annoying. Try sharing a snow house with 5 snoring hunters and tell me what frustration really is. Yet in that annoyance is the truth. Shared warmth meant shared survival. There's a story from the 18th century of a group of whalers stranded in Baffin Bay who tried to sleep apart, each curled in his own corner, and by dawn 2 had frozen stiff, while those who huddled together survived. That story made its way into Inuit, oral tradition, as proof that pride kills faster than the cold. You lean closer in your mind's eye, feeling the heat of others pressed beside you, and for once you're grateful for the human need to belong. Outside, the wind lashes against the dome like claws, but inside, someone begins a tale perhaps. Of Sedna, the sea goddess whose fingers became seals, whales and walruses, or perhaps of a trickster who stole fire from spirits and lit the first lamp. The children's eyes widen, their mouths open in wonder, and the story drapes over them like another blanket. Oddly enough, these tales weren't just entertainment. They carried instructions hidden inside, lessons on respect, on hunting, on humility. Forget bedtime stories about princesses. These were survival manuals disguised as myths. You chuckle at the thought. Once upon a time, and here's how to not die tonight. And the laughter is contagious, because in the face of endless night, humor becomes its own kind of insulation. You remember your own family gatherings, maybe around a holiday table, warmth shared not by necessity, but by choice. And suddenly, you realize that the Arctic stripped everything down to its essentials. No one cared what gifts you brought, only that you brought your warmth, your story, your presence. Explorers often wrote about the uncanny cheerfulness of Inuit families, baffled that people living in what Europeans saw as a wasteland could laugh so easily. But here's the thing they had to. Laughter thawed the silence, kept fear from settling in, reminded everyone that they were alive, together. You shift again, shoulder brushing shoulder, and feel the thrum of a song vibrating through you. For a moment, You're less an individual and more a thread in a fabric, woven tightly so the night can't pull you apart. And as the lamp sputters, throwing a last lick of light against the curved wall, you realize that maybe survival has never been about the strongest hunter or the sharpest tool. Maybe it's always been about this, a circle of warmth in a world of ice, the knowledge that even when the sun forgets to rise, you are not alone. You step outside again, breath curling into the endless dark, and realize that out here it isn't just the cold that can kill you. It's losing your way in a world where every direction looks the same. The horizon is erased, the stars sometimes hidden, the wind twisting snow into shapes that confuse even the most confident traveler. And yet Inuit hunters found tricks that turned chaos into compass. Imagine squinting against a blizzard, snowflakes stinging your face, and noticing the way drifts form. Their edges curl with the wind, long smooth slopes on one side, sharp ridges on the other. A drift is not just snow. It's a frozen arrow pointing the way home, if only you can read it. Historians still debate whether these navigation skills were instinctive or taught through careful observation. But the odd detail is that some hunters claimed they could hear direction in the way the wind whistled across the ice, as if the land itself hummed a map. You smirk at the thought meanwhile. You get lost leaving a shopping mall because you can't remember which escalator you took. Out here, one wrong turn doesn't just waste time. It writes your obituary. You picture a hunter on a moonless night, no compass, no GPS, just the subtle tilt of a snowdrift, the faint shimmer of a star when clouds break, and the memory of how the wind had cut against his cheek earlier that day. There's a story from the early 20th century of a group of explorers who mocked the idea that someone could navigate by snow, only to wander in circles until they collapsed. An Inuit guide later found their camp by following those same drifts and shook his head at their stubbornness. The Arctic doesn't forgive pride. It rewards those who listen. Oddly enough, some elders taught children to memorize the patterns of stars by weaving them into stories, like how Orion's belt became 3 hunters carrying torches, or how the Pleiades marked the path of a wandering fox. Forget your astronomy apps. These star maps fit into memory like songs, impossible to lose even in the darkest night. You tilt your head upward, watching the aurora unravel across the sky like a ribbon tossed by unseen hands, and you wonder how anyone could find their way under such distraction. And here's the joke. The aurora is so mesmerizing it's practically the universe saying, "Look here, but follow it too long and you'll end up hopelessly turned around." The hunters knew this too, and they whispered warnings not to whistle at the lights, or the spirits would swoop down and steal you away. Navigation wasn't just about science. It was tangled up in myth, in respect for forces too big to measure. And in that respect lay safety. You imagine trudging forward, testing each step with your spear, reading the world as if it were a book written in ice, and slowly, impossibly, you find yourself oriented. Your footprints, which moments ago looked like nothing but scattered dents, begin to form a line, a path, and the thought hits you. Maybe the land doesn't want you to be lost. Maybe it's only waiting for you to pay attention. There's humor in this to imagine, telling a modern traveler that their survival depends on watching the snow carefully. They'd laugh right before freezing 3 feet from shelter. And so you keep walking, guided by drifts, by the whisper of the wind, by the faint glow of a star that refuses to die behind the clouds. Step by step, the Arctic teaches you the oldest truth. Survival isn't about conquering nature, it's about noticing it. And as your boots crunch steadily forward, you begin to feel the strange comfort of it, as though the night itself, once hostile and endless, is now a teacher leaning close, murmuring, "This way, if you're clever enough to listen." You pause in the dark, the wind quiet for once, and it's then that you feel it, it prickling at the back of your neck, as though someone unseen is watching. Out here, silence isn't empty. It's crowded with spirits, or at least that's what Inuit hunters believed. Imagine crouching over a seal hole, breath shallow, when suddenly the ice cracks in the distance like a whip. Is it just shifting pressure? Or is it Sedna, the sea goddess, stirring her long hair beneath the waves? The Arctic is full of sounds you can't explain, and in those moments, you realize survival isn't only about warmth or food, it's about respect for the shadows. Historians still debate whether the elaborate rituals described in missionary journals were literal practices or symbolic warnings. But the odd detail is that hunters often carried tiny carved amulets, bones shaped like animals, believing they could soothe the spirits of the prey they killed. You think about that your ancestors wore lucky socks to sports games, while these people wore lucky walrus tusks to keep the night from swallowing them whole. The joke writes itself. Your superstition is embarrassing. Theirs was life insurance. You remember being told not to step on cracks in the sidewalk, but here the taboo might be not to whistle under the aurora, because if you do, the lights will swoop down and slice your head off. Exaggeration? Maybe, but when you're standing under a sky that shimmers green and red like a curtain on fire, it's easy to believe anything. Picture it. Hunters walking side by side, their breaths pluming, their voices low, not because of the cold, but because of the sense that unseen ears are listening. And in the stories told by firelight, the spirits weren't vague. They had names, personalities, grudges. Disrespect the soul of a caribou, and the herd might vanish for a season. Forget to thank the seal, and the ice might refuse to give you another. The land itself was alive, temperamental, demanding courtesy. Oddly enough, some anthropologists note that these taboos served a practical purpose. They prevented overhunting, reinforced rituals of gratitude, and kept communities aligned with sustainable practices long before that word existed. You imagine the flicker of an oil lamp casting shadows on an elder's face as he tells children how once, long ago, a hunter mocked the spirit of a polar bear and was later found buried in the snow with only his boots sticking out. Coincidence? Historians argue. But in a land where even a joke could cost your life, better to laugh softly and bow your head. And here's the irony. Those same explorers who scoffed at the superstitions ended up borrowing them, whispering thanks over their first kills, just in case. Because when you've been in the dark long enough, you start to feel the weight of eyes you can't see. The Arctic doesn't just challenge your body, it challenges your certainty. It whispers that maybe the line between real and imagined isn't so sharp after all. You pull your hood lower, glance at the sky where the aurora rides like serpents of light, and you wonder what would happen if you whistled right now. The urge itches at your lips, reckless curiosity, the same kind that drove explorers across oceans. But then a gust of wind slaps your face, sharp as a warning, and you swallow the whistle back. You laugh nervously. Bravery is one thing, but stupidity is another. Better to leave the spirits unprovoked. And so you walk on, the shadows shifting beside you, your heart beating with the rhythm of old stories, and you realize that survival here wasn't just about tricks of snow and seal, oil. It was about humility, about acknowledging that in a world so vast and cruel, you are never truly alone. You walk further into the darkness, but instead of fear, you feel something else creeping in, a strange sense of pride, as if the ice itself has acknowledged that you've earned the right to be here. The tricks you've seen snow turn to shelter, seals turn to light, caribou turned to armor, wind turned into compass, spirits turned into teachers are more than survival hacks. They're the threads of a legacy woven through generations, and the longer you follow them, the clearer it becomes that Inuit endurance wasn't a fluke, but a philosophy. Imagine European explorers landing here with their brass instruments and wool uniforms, convinced of their superiority, only to freeze while the primitive locals built homes out of snow, feasted on seal, and laughed through storms. Historians still debate whether those explorers truly respected the knowledge they borrowed or simply treated it as temporary convenience. But the odd detail is that many of their journals quietly documented how they survived only by imitating what they had once mocked. You picture it. A stiff-collared officer crouched awkwardly inside an igloo, fumbling with a seal oil lamp, muttering under his breath while an Inuit family calmly shows him what to do. That image tells you everything you can conquer half the world with muskets and maps. But up here, the only empire that matters is survival. And here's the joke. Think about the modern survival shows you binge on weekends, where contestants panic over starting a fire with matches. An Inuit child 2 centuries ago would have rolled their eyes and said, "Pass me the soapstone, rookie." Yet this isn't just about laughing at outsiders. It's about realizing that endurance here wasn't passive. It was creativity sharpened by cold, an intelligence that turned scarcity into abundance. Carved tools from bone, sleds shaped to skim over snow, songs and stories that carried not just entertainment, but instructions coded in rhythm. When you realize this, the Arctic stops being just a wasteland. It becomes a library, each trick a book, each tradition a chapter in humanity's ongoing argument with nature. And speaking of arguments, historians still wrestle with the question of whether Inuit knowledge was ever truly absorbed into Western culture or merely appropriated when convenient. Some say it was ignored until explorers were desperate. Others argue that elements like layered clothing and snow navigation quietly shaped polar science. But regardless of the debate, the evidence is right here in the fact that explorers lived because hunters shared. That's the legacy, the silent generosity of a people who knew the land well enough to endure. You glance back over the tricks you've gathered, and they blur together into something larger, something more human than technical. Because at the heart of it, survival here wasn't about defiance. It was about partnership with the land, with the animals, with each other, with the unseen. And you wonder, in your warm room far from the ice, what lessons you've ignored, what tricks you've laughed at, what wisdom you've overlooked, because it didn't come with a glossy manual. Maybe that's the hook of the Arctic, the reason. Its stories matter even now. It humbles you. It strips you bare and says, pay attention, or else. And yet, in that sternness, it offers a strange comfort. Because if people could carve safety out of snow, coax warmth from oil, and navigate by the whisper of wind, then maybe endurance isn't about strength at all. Maybe it's about listening. You take a final breath of that frozen air, let it sting your lungs, and realize that the tricks of Inuit hunters weren't just survival tools. They were proof that even in the most hostile corners of the world, humans can find a way to live, laugh, and leave behind stories strong enough to outlast the dark dot. Now slow down. Let your shoulders sink and feel how the air around you softens. No longer sharp with frost, but heavy with calm. The snow outside doesn't howl anymore. It drifts quietly, a blanket tucking the earth into stillness. The aurora that once blazed overhead fades into a gentle smear of light, like paint brushed thin across the sky. Your breath slows, each exhale warmer than the last, melting the distance between you and sleep. Imagine the glow of a lamp dimming lower and lower, shadows stretching until they blur into nothing. You are no longer walking across ice, no longer waiting at seal holes, no longer listening for spirits in the dark. You are simply resting, cocooned in warmth, safe in the knowledge that survival is no longer your burden tonight. Let the stories fade, let the silence carry you, and close your eyes with the comfort that the night is watching over you gently, quietly, endlessly. End of script. Good night.